Okay, gang, so let's continue on talking about communities, but this time let's talk about changes in communities because change does happen and change can happen in a couple different ways. The first way we'll talk about change in communities about ecological succession. So there's two major types of change in succession. This is change over time, and this is normal. Things don't stay the same way forever. They change over time. Different things can grow in different situations. Something happens that may change the situation, and then something else will start growing. So the first type of ecological succession is primary succession. This generally occurs where you have like brand new islands popping up out of the ocean, or maybe a glacier has come through an area and really upturn the soil. And essentially the idea is you're starting from brand new, you're starting from scratch. You don't have any seeds left in the seed bank. There's nothing left over from what was there, or it's brand new. Um, and the other type of succession is secondary succession. And this is where you're not starting from scratch. You're actually starting from something that pre-existed. So imagine like a forest that was clear cut down to a field. And over time, that field could grow back up into a forest. That would be secondary succession because you're not starting from scratch. You're starting from a primary succession, and you're wiping it out, but not completely, and you're just letting it essentially regrow. So there's an example of secondary succession for you. So with primary succession, let's say you have a new volcanic island that's popped up out of the ocean. Okay, there's no seed bank, there's no seeds in there. All right, to start off, seeds may come in through birds or other ways, but you're starting basically with just bare rock. There's no soil, there's nothing growing there. And one of the first things that will pop in are going to be what we call pioneer plants. And the best pioneer plant is actually a type of lichen. Lichen is a blue-green algae and a fungus that lives together. One does photosynthesis, the other one produces energy, one produces energy, the other one produces other things that they need to survive, and they work together in kind of a mutualistic relationship. But they'll pop up on bare rock, and they help to break down the rock, and they start creating the first level of soil just a little bit. Well, once you get a little bit of soil, you can start having very small plants, like annual plants, things that just pop up seasonally will start to grow. And as they grow and die, their bodies pile up and they add to the soil and the organic matter that's on the rock. And so you can imagine that as that occurs over time, larger things can start to grow. So you start to move up to perennial plants, things that are there pretty much on a yearly basis. Small shrubby plants can start to grow, and when they grow and die and they shed their leaves, they're adding to the soil. The amount of soil is getting larger, and that leads to larger things starting to grow, larger shrubs and small trees. Eventually, you can get to the point where there's enough soil on the ground, enough organic material on the ground, that larger trees can start to take root. And at first, there's going to be lots of sunlight available, and so you're going to have lots of softwood trees, pine trees, conifers. They love lots of sunlight. And especially in our area of the world, we have tons of pine trees all over the place. We're in the pine belt. So these pine trees, they really like light. They don't like shade, but they do like light. So they'll start to grow. And as they do start to cast shade, you'll start to get hardwood trees that grow. Now, hardwood trees love shade. They actually thrive in it. And so as they start to grow, they cast shade over the soft wood trees, over the pine trees, and the pine trees will die out. And that leads to what we call the apex community, which is a hardwood forest. And so just imagine you're standing in one spot, and over time you can see that the area you're standing in changes, and it moves through this progression, this succession of different ecosystems that are growing there. First you're on mostly barren rock with a few small plants, then you're in a field, then you're in a shrub field, then you're in a field, no longer a field, you're in a pine forest, and eventually you'll be standing in the same spot, but you'll be in a hardwood forest. That's primary succession, because you started essentially from nothing, just from bare rock. Now here in the U.S., in the southeastern part of the U.S. more specifically, we don't have an apex community. We don't have large standing hardwood trees. Now, if you go to some of the low-laying areas where the soil stays wet, you do. You actually have a lot of hardwood trees. Pine trees don't really like bottom areas. They don't like being down in the water. Now, there's something that occurs in our area that keeps our pine forest growing. Why don't we see hardwood forest all over the South? Well, there's something that happens ecologically that keeps us at that sub-apex community, that pine tree community, rather than the hardwood community, and that's periodic fires. The ecology in our area is used to having fires burn through every 2 to 3 years. It's just something that all the life here has evolved with. We get a lot of lightning strikes in the southeastern U.S. Only a couple places on Earth actually get more lightning strikes than we do. But with all that lightning comes fire, and when that fire burns through, hardwood trees do not like fire at all. And so that kills them off in those high-laying areas on tops of hills and just away from water. But in the wet areas, fire can't burn through there. It's too wet. So we see hardwood trees dominating our lowland areas, where most of our higher elevation areas have pine trees in them. And so we're kind of held at a sub-apex community. We call this, they call that type of ecosystem or type of biome, we call that a pine savanna. So we'll have pine trees and lots of grasses and shrubs below it. And that's the natural state for our area. But if you follow the idea of the successive process, this is what we go through. Now, it doesn't matter if you start from primary or secondary. If you come through and you clear cut this forest, you'll basically start back down here where the grasses are, and you'll work your way back up. You're not starting from nothing. You had a forest here. You're starting from some pre-existing seeds in the seed bank. There's already soil down, so that would be secondary succession, like in this field. This forest was clear cut. As long as it's bush hogged, none of the larger trees and larger plants can grow. But in this one particular spot, underneath this car, they weren't able to bush hog, and this tree has grown up. So this is an example of secondary succession. So the next slide just shows some differences between primary and secondary. With primary succession, again, you're starting from bare rock. And with secondary succession, you're starting with like a field of weeds and wildflowers. And it will eventually grow back into the apex community, in our case, the sub-apex community. Same thing with here. Over time, we see that ecosystems do change.